We're here today with Justin Bird, CEO of Sempra LNG. He's been CEO since the spring of 2020. He was president of Sempra LNG before that and has a long history of Sempra in the gas infrastructure area. He has a very simple job, just grow Sempra's LNG business throughout the global markets. Justin, welcome to WGC Explorers, and we'd all love to hear a little bit more about yourself.
Thank you, Terry. So yes, I have a long history of gas infrastructure at Sempra LNG and at Sempra generally. I joined the company in 2004. I am one of those infamous reformed lawyers. So I was a project finance lawyer prior to that. And some of the first things I worked on were actually the regas projects at Energía Costa Azul and Cameron. So from my first days at Sempra, I was on the LNG side. Then I did some other development on our renewables assets, other assets around the company, had a few different positions within the legal side. Then I, in a sense, came back to LNG when Cameron became a liquefaction project. So I led the financing of that project. That was a very, very big effort. We raised approximately $7 billion, combination of JBIC, Nexi, in a series of commercial banks. So was involved in Cameron around that. Then I took another detour. I served as the corporate secretary to the Sempra Energy Board. Then after that, I was sent to Los Angeles to deal with some of the aftermath of the Aliso Canyon incident. And after that stint and a few other detours, I came back to Sempra LNG and have been here since.
It's a remarkable history. So you have all your bases covered, everything from the legal aspects, the permitting, the construction, to operation. Now you're marketing it. Well, look, you certainly became CEO of Sempra LNG in a very interesting year. If you look back on 2020, exports were terrific from January through May. Then we had the pandemic hit. We had record lows during the summer, and things increased during the fall. And we set consecutive record highs in November and December. And what's interesting, if you look at the IGU's 12th annual LNG report, it shows that the United States accounted for all of the world's new liquefied natural gas production capacity last year. And these exports from the US grew despite challenges created by the COVID pandemic. What lessons did you learn from the pandemic experience and this crazy market volatility, which might get you through this fall and this winter? And also, to hear how the pandemic affected your operations, how your company navigated last year and are going to navigate this fall.
2020 was quite a year. I think we as a world suffered through the pandemic, and our hearts go out to those who were affected by the pandemic and communities, our friends and our families. So the other interesting thing that happened in 2020 was, we had the oil price situation. So I think you saw a lot of volatility in the markets. Some of that was the decrease in demand. Some of it was cut back on supply. And I think this trend is really the learning coming out of the pandemic is that, this is a commoditized business. Supply and demand probably will match only for brief periods. We also are an infrastructure business where building new infrastructure to provide supply takes a long time, a long permitting process, long planning process. So I think this volatility that you're seeing will continue. At our company, we are focused on long-term contracts. So what we offer is the chance to really, lock in those prices. Some people are interested in that. Others prefer to be in the spot market. I guess the other big learning coming out of this, and goes to your question about how we got through this, I think we saw a lot of resilience in the LNG market. We saw a small growth in LNG demand during this period, despite the reduction in overall fossil fuel use. We also saw resilience in our employees, innovation, technology. We learned how to unload ships in a socially distanced manner. We learned how to operate at a socially distanced manner. We learned how to work from home. We learned how to, do these video conferences. We got better at all these things. So I think, there will be a change in how we work in the future. I hope it's for a positive. I also think we'll continue to see this volatility, and it's something that, we need to manage through.
Well, let's shift to what's happening right now. As I mentioned, the first 6 months of 2021 saw LNG exports set records. The summer LNG markets were incredible, led by Asia. They came roaring back from the pandemic. We saw the lowest prices in 30 years last year, and now we're seeing the highest summer prices since 2014. And some of this demand is pulling cargoes away from Europe. There's been a surge in European energy prices. Scramble for gas is creating pockets of scarcity. And we're seeing global prices anywhere from $12 to $15. So I'd like to ask you several things about this environment. What factors do you see driving these LNG prices so high?
Well, again, I think what you're seeing is, a mismatch between the supply that's available in the world and the demand. I think you've always seen Europe play the sink role. So Europe fills up when Asian prices are low. As Asian prices increase, you're seeing some of those volumes come out of Europe. And, LNG has really become a global commodity. And where the prices are the best, you'll see LNG going there. So I think, it's interesting. I remember a conversation between the then president of Sempra LNG, Darcel Hulse, and a consultant back in 2005 or 6. And the fundamental debate was about whether LNG prices were ever going to become, commoditized across the world. And I think we're getting closer to that. I think we're starting to see that. I do think, with shifts in weather, shifts in demand, frankly, what we've seen in the pandemic, it feels like we've come out of the pandemic like 4 times now, only to unfortunately revert. So I think you're still seeing some uncertainty in what demand will look like when the economy restarts. You're seeing signs of it, and I think we're optimistic about how we're going to come out of this.
Do you think in the end these high prices, are they sustainable? If they are sustained, will lower demand?
Yeah. I think 2 things are happening. One is I think as you see higher prices, you'll probably see more interest in increasing supply. That's one factor. I think the other thing you're going to see is you may see less shifting from coal or other energy sources, or you may see a shift away from natural gas and to some other form of energy. So I do think these kind of short-term prices are market signals. The other thing I think we're seeing is you may see less supply as people try to figure out what kind of LNG will be marketable in the future. And by what kind of LNG, I'm talking about green LNG. How do you certificate it? What is it? Do you have to pay carbon, cost associated with it? So that's another topic I'm sure we'll cover.
Well, we had a headline here in the Houston papers not too long ago saying basically the era of cheap gas is over. We've had consistently over $3 a million BTUs here in the Texas production, et cetera. I've been in this business for 45 years, and I've heard the era of cheap gas is over. And I've seen prices crash 4 times in my life. So, yes. Is the era of cheap gas over?
I have to say I agree with you, Terry. I think what we call cheap gas has been defined multiple times at different price levels. So, what may be expensive now, we may call cheap 2 years from now. So I think, again, as you see supply and demand mismatching, you're going to see this price volatility. I think, the environment for oil and gas around the world is a little uncertain right now. I think you're seeing producers in the U.S. More reluctant to increase their supplies or hold out to see what is happening. So it's natural that prices will increase as I said before. As you see those price signals, I think you'll see more producers produce more, and then you'll see some flex in the market. But I would never be one to say this is the last time we're going to see anything in oil or gas prices.
Let's talk about the marketplaces, and I mentioned that. Asia came roaring back. Mm-hmm. And you look at this year, we're looking, we always had the traditional demand centers like Japan, Korea, and of course, China. But the LNG business was looking very optimistically about new markets such as Myanmar, Vietnam, the Philippines. This could be a whole new market area. And then some say that demand in Southeast Asia could go up 4 or 5 times over the next 10 years. But this COVID has just devastated these economies, and this also includes India. Let's be optimistic, though. This too will pass, as they say. How do you assess these new markets? And what will be the big challenges for you in developing LNG markets in say, Southeast Asia?
There are a few. One is, as we talked about, the current prices probably make it more economical for them to find other energy sources, whether that be coal or even less clean sources of energy. I think the other thing that could play a factor is, energy security in those countries. So if they have an indigenous source of energy, it's more likely they're going to use that. But we are optimistic about those markets. We think as energy demand comes out of the pandemic, as we try to supply the world with more energy, and frankly, as we try to supply the world more energy that is cleaner, I think LNG will play a critical role in those nations. So it's another one. There's a lot of uncertainty now with the pandemic, and as I said, the sense that we're coming out, but we go back in. So I think as economies restart and truly restart and come out, and as countries look to expand their energy resources and to make those cleaner, I think LNG will play a role in those countries you referred to.
Looking at the Pacific, those markets there, it was kind of exciting to see that last fall you announced that a pair of your subsidiaries will build an export component on the Pacific coast of Baja. What advantage do you think this new facility will have in this marketplace in the Pacific?
We're really excited about Energía Costa Azul, ECA. As you know, it was the only liquefaction project to take final investment decision last year. We're proud of that. And frankly, I've been very grateful for the outpouring of support from the broader industry that is just excited about having a final investment decision in 2020. So I think you have a few advantages. One, there's definitely a cost advantage because this is a brownfield facility. It's associated with the regas. It's a relatively small facility because we will still be servicing those regas contracts through their term. It is also geographically more proximate, as you know, to Asia. You don't have to go through the Panama Canal. As you know, in LNG, shipping costs are significant, a significant portion of the landed costs versus something like oil. So a shorter journey, a more certain journey where you don't have to pass through the Panama Canal, all of those things are advantages that really made ECA, exciting for the marketplace. I will say we're also looking at other opportunities on that west coast of Mexico. We've talked a little bit about a project called Vista Pacifico, early stages, but again, same premise, which is the geographic advantage of being on the west coast of Mexico and in proximity to certain markets in Asia.
This is an incredibly competitive market, Asia. You're going head to head against other U.S. companies, Australia, Qatar. So while we have this intense competition on the supply side, we now have the three largest economies in the region agreeing to a net zero emissions by a date certain. And, Japan released their initial look at this pledge and said they'll reduce LNG imports by 17% in 2030. If these countries go forward with these pledges and actually accomplish them, how do you think this is going to impact the LNG demand in the region? And, do you see renewables taking a greater share of the marketplace there?
I do think you'll see a differentiated role for LNG versus natural gas generally. If everything goes as everyone has planned, I do think you could see some reduction in overall demand for LNG in the region. I will say we've had this experience here in California. In our service territory here, where I am now, San Diego, we have some of the highest renewable penetration. And what you see is a shift in the use of natural gas. It really comes on quickly when those renewables aren't providing power. It's something we've seen in the California market. Natural gas still plays a critical baseload role. However, that role is very different than what it has historically been. So I think in these markets, you will see renewables come online. You will see renewables playing a significant role around the world. The question is, what energy sources are going to provide that base power that supports those renewables? And that's where we think natural gas is a natural fit, particularly as it gets greener. LNG in those countries, a lot of those countries you're talking about, will be the source of natural gas.
Right, and there's still a tremendous amount of coal being burned throughout the region. There's probably no faster way to reduce emissions or meet some of these goals than to replace that coal with
absolutely
natural gas. Right. All the press is about Europe gas prices and talk about the Asian markets, et cetera. But some of the most exciting things on LNG exports has occurred in South American markets. And so let's shift to that region. And, several of these countries down there, including Mexico, import LNG. Brazil has reported record amounts of LNG recently. And U.S. South American cargoes in the first half of the year have more than doubled, outstripping increases to Asian and Europe. To what extent do you all focus on the South American markets, and what insights can you give us into those markets?
I think, South America has been interesting. You've seen some growth. You've seen some countries who I think had hoped to be exporters. Argentina, for example, who's probably still importing. As a company, clearly we're more focused on Mexico. It is important for those in the US. I mean, Mexico is our largest importer of natural gas. We have a significant presence in Mexico on our gas pipeline business. So we're much more focused on Mexico. And when I say Mexico, I mean our LNG projects, as well as the natural gas going there via pipeline. One of the things we've talked about as a company, and we have some changes going on, we're creating what's called Sempra Infrastructure Partners, which is really bringing together our LNG business and our Enova business under a common partnership. We've stated we've publicly sold 20% of that. We're in the process of selling 20% of that to KKR. So I think you'll see further integration of our gas businesses and our LNG businesses in Mexico. We do have discussions with various countries in South America about their desire to take LNG. Again, the Gulf Coast and Pacific Coast are two prime locations to deliver to South America, depending on where you are in South America. So we do watch those markets.
Well, let's go back to the climate concerns and the Paris Agreement and the net zero pledges, et cetera. I mean, these pledges go beyond Asia and are being made worldwide. I think the top 100 economies in the world now pledge to reach net zero emissions within the next 20 to 30 years. And now we have the IEA roadmap coming out this summer that calls for a halt in investment in all new fossil supply projects. If we're going to meet these goals. Yet at the same time, billions of dollars are being spent to develop natural gas projects in anticipation of growing demand. It's kind of going to be a collision here somewhere. Do you believe that these developing countries will somehow drastically curtail their energy options and not use fossil fuels to meet these targets? Or do you see LNG as really having an important role in meeting these net zero emission targets?
It goes back to that fundamental discussion we had, which is the need to grow energy to the world, at the same time, the need to make it cleaner. So I think LNG will play a critical role as countries transition off of less clean fuels and really move toward cleaner energy sources. One of the things I talked about, Sempra Infrastructure Partners, we will be renaming the LNG business unit LNG and Net Zero Solutions. We can talk about that in the future. But one of the things we're seeing is, carbon capture becomes necessary. Can we produce LNG cargoes that are net zero? And what role will those cargoes play in the overall marketplace? So I think we are likewise committed to achieving net zero. I think LNG will play a role in that. One, by, again, offsetting less clean energy sources, and two, really helping support developing nations as they try to fuel their economies. The real thing we have to do is to get LNG greener and have some common set of understanding of what we mean when we say LNG is green or greener.
It's been kind of an exciting development. I know that Sempra Energy joined One Future I guess last January, and Sempra LNG has joined CANS in March as part of your effort to reduce methane emissions, which was a huge, huge issue in the gas business. I think the consensus in our industry is that remain an active player in the future markets and in this net zero quest, we're going to have to reduce our methane emissions. And it's exciting to hear that, Mexico received its first cargo from your Costa Azul terminal. That was a carbon offset cargo.
Correct.
So let's go a little deeper into some of the things that you're doing in reducing the challenges and reducing emissions and decarbonizing your facilities and the LNG cargoes.
So first off, I would say one of the lessons that we learned, and I think we're learning as a world, is, our specific assets are a very small part of the cradle to grave emissions. So liquefaction generally, people will say, is about roughly 5%, 6% of the emissions of the value chain. So one thing we're focused on is, can we reduce the emissions of that 5 to 6%? What's becoming more important is for us to look upstream from us and downstream from us. How are we going to reduce the rest of those 95% emissions? So some of the things we're doing on that side is looking to power our LNG facilities with green power. So can we increase the use of renewables in the production of our LNG? Can we work with producers who can provide cleaner or net zero gas? How are they doing on emissions? At our facility, again, can we switch to e-drives? Something we are looking at and we have stated publicly. Can we capture carbon from some of our industrial processes? Can we help others capture carbon as part of that same process? And then downstream, how can we work with customers to really give them certification? And how can we help them or advise them on cleaning up their own use of the gas?
You think that at some point people will pay a premium for clean LNG or green LNG, or?
Yeah, I sure hope so. Whether it is a premium or a certain type of LNG that isn't certificated for its greenness will trade at a discount, I think the same concept applies. I think you are going to see increased demand for green LNG, particularly in countries that have made those types of pledges that we discussed.
I guess for importers, there's two ways to handle this. You either pay a premium for the green, or you penalize the dirty.
Correct.
I know the carbon, the border adjustment taxes that are being proposed in the EU, we're all watching that carefully. And we're trying to figure out if it's going to be used as a weapon against LNG imports, or at least dirty imports. So,
yes.
And you have any thoughts on this proposed carbon border tax?
It's interesting because what it's going to determine is what sources of energy are going to be used and what are the cost associated with those. So you're going to see some interesting dynamics in the market. And will those carbon costs be greater than the cost of either greening the LNG, or will the LNG go to a different market where it can get, a higher net cost? So, we've seen the same thing on renewables with all the policies designed to, really spur the use of renewables. So it's something we definitely watch. Frankly, I think certainty one way or the other is what is most helpful, particularly when you're making long infrastructure decisions, to have some certainty. What are the costs going to be? How do you avoid those costs? How do you certificate, LNG coming into a particular market? All of those will go a long way to reducing the uncertainty in the market.
You mentioned green finance. This is the other side of the coin on the net zero targets. You know better than anybody that downstream gas infrastructure investment will be the key to growing gas markets, especially in these developing countries. I mean, these countries are wrestling with three big financial challenges. One, build their economies. Two, mitigate climate impacts. And then three, this desire that they go redo their entire energy systems to more of a green, renewable thing. We're seeing an accelerated participation by private investors. It used to be the big banks, the world banks and the multilateral banks now, but we're seeing private investors and investment community jumping into this with a focus on sustainable investing. And there's certain anti-gas sentiment to some of these green, what we call them green investors, for lack of a better term. Do you see this anti-gas sentiment in the financial community stalling some of these LNG projects?
You raise a great point, because I think what we're seeing is you're going to see, and I think the IEA agrees with this, most of the energy growth in the world is going to happen in Africa and Asia. And the real challenge is, how do you build energy production in those countries in a way that is cleaner than what they can otherwise do with indigenous sources, or frankly with coal? Cost will be an issue in those countries. So you need to provide an energy source that is economical. At the same time, you also want to provide a clean energy source. So we have lots of discussions with downstream, and you're right. One of their concerns is, how do I finance the infrastructure in my country, right, when a lot of banks are saying that oil and gas has a higher risk and therefore has to have a higher reserve, therefore a higher borrowing cost. So it is something that I think we're going to have to face. And to be frank, are we comfortable with banks not lending to those? And what happens in the world that doesn't happen? I think you're going to see more dirtier energy proliferating. I mean, as countries grow, they need energy. How do you provide that new energy? How do you provide it as greenly as possible?
Yeah, you mentioned Africa, and you look at the number of people in Africa who don't have access to full electricity. And we take 24-hour electricity for granted. And there's many places in the world that if they had 4 hours in a row of electricity production, they figure it was a good day. How this shapes out, there's going to be some tough choices made. And the bottom line is, these countries have to look at their economy and the people.
And the other thing to note is, again, it's not like, we're in a vacuum here in the US, or frankly, here in California. We may have different energy policy goals. We may be at a different state of where we're trying to make our energy even cleaner. However, the air I'm breathing here in beautiful San Diego, may have been in some other place in the world, 4 days ago. So this concept that, localism can sometimes be an impediment to really true net improvements in the cleanliness of energy around the world.
Right. That's one of the things I don't think they factor into some of these discussions, is in fact, the LNG industry does start producing, as your goal, net zero cargoes. Would this say, well, we should reconsider financing facilities if that's the type of gas that's going to be coming in? So you have a lot on your plate besides current markets and what's going on there. And you have a lot of developments on the table for expansions, et cetera. This is probably a really good time for you to update us on Sempra's LNG facilities. We talked a little bit about the Baja export facility. We also have the Port Arthur facility, and you have some other expansions planned. So this would be a really good time to have you update us on where these stand.
So Energía Costa Azul, ECA, is in engineering and construction. So early construction activities are happening at the site right now. We've been very fortunate. We have a great safety record coming out of Cameron, and that safety record is holding true at ECA. We are working through the challenges of the pandemic and social distancing, making sure that our workers and our contractors are safe. So that is going very well at this point. I'm happy to report we're on time, on budget, and high quality things that we measure. So things are going well there. The other thing I talked about the small scale or the first phase of ECA. We are still interested in looking at the opportunity to expand that to a second phase. And really that will come around the time that those existing contracts at the regas side expire. So we're looking for additional expansion opportunities there. You talked about Port Arthur. So Port Arthur, we recently announced that some of our contracts were expiring. But what we're doing there is really two things. One, improving the emissions profile of the base LNG plant, looking at e-drives, other ways to reduce emissions, also looking at ways to reduce costs there. The other thing, we had contemplated that site as a big, up to 8 trains of LNG. Some of the other things we're in discussions with are, do you do a base LNG project? And frankly, do you do some hydrogen or other opportunities on the rest of that side? So we're in some interesting discussions around that there. So we're excited about that. Cameron is in operations, the first phase, and we've talked openly about the second phase. Pretty exciting about that opportunity. I'm proud of our team's work on the innovation side. We've really been able to get more LNG out of one train and some potential debottlenecking. So we think the second phase at Cameron would be a one train project, very economical. And we're working with our partners on that project early in pre-feed process, probably a shift to e-drives. Also at Cameron, we're looking at carbon sequestration. So I talked about that. We are in the process of working with our partners on that. We see an opportunity not just to capture some of the carbon coming off of the LNG facility, but that area in the Gulf is very proximate to a lot of industrial uses where we can really capture their carbon as well. So that's an exciting opportunity for us. I also talked about Vista Pacifico on the west coast of Mexico, another project that we're also looking at. So exciting times, yeah, a lot on the plate, and I'm happy to be supported by a wonderful team who's doing their best.
Let's shift gears and talk about the World Gas Conference a bit. Last year we made the decision to postpone the World Gas Conference, next year in Korea, and we're delighted that Sempra LNG is a sponsor, by the way, of World Gas 2022. What are the benefits and reasons to participate in an industry event like the World Gas Conference?
I think the World Gas Conference is a wonderful opportunity, frankly, post-pandemic, to see a lot of my friends and colleagues around the world right. who I've only either talked to on the phone or seen in person. So I think you will see a lot of excitement, as people get back to business and frankly, reconnect with a lot of their colleagues. I also think it's an interesting chance to share our perspectives, to interact with colleagues and talk to people about what they're seeing in the market, what their views are, speaking to buyers face to face, which frankly has been a challenge for the past 18 months. Having a place where you can go and have multiple meetings with buyers and really understand where they are, how they're coming out of the pandemic, what they see in demand, what products they want, what they think about green LNG. It's a wonderful opportunity to get together and to do those things. And to be frank, this year, it's in Korea, so it's very exciting.
So I'll put you on the spot then. What's going to be the most important topic?
It's a topic that I actually discussed, and I think it was at a 2019 conference where I picked up on a theme that another speaker was talking about, and it was this concept of being lost in transition. And it was a play on lost in translation, but this concept of where are we as an industry in the energy transition? What role do we play? How do we ensure that we play the right role, that we play a role in the energy system in the future? And to be frank, I'm very excited about the opportunity. I actually am firmly committed to LNG playing a critical role in that. But I think that will be an exciting topic. I think another exciting topic coming out will be, how has the workplace changed? How are different companies dealing with remote working, or using innovation, using technology to better monitor things remotely? I'm excited to attend the World Gas Conference. I think, again, I don't want to quite use the term party, but I do think there will be a lot of celebrating as we move out of the pandemic and we move this industry forward.
There'll be a lot to talk about. And boy, the idea of sitting, as you say, sitting across the table and talking to people you have not seen by then, it'd be almost 2 years.
Yes.
Well, again, thank you very much. By the way, COP26 will have occurred end of this year. So we'll see all these targets by these companies, countries, et cetera, put on the table. So that'll be, I'm sure, going to be another huge topic at the World Gas Conference.
Absolutely.
And once again, thank you very much for doing this.
Absolutely. Thank you, Terry.